Welcome to Evergreen Perspective. I'm your host, Ben Chrisley. Today we're going to talk about a question that is on a lot of people's mind. Not just quietly in the back of your head, but out loud. We talk about it at home, we talk about it on the job site, we talk about it around the dinner table, at the coffee shop. Why are we broke? Why are so many hardworking Americans falling behind no matter how many hours they work or how many jobs they juggle? Or how well they follow the so-called rules. In this first episode of a two-part series, we're going to dig into how wages got stuck, how work got cheaper, and how wealth of this country has been climbing. But not for those of us who've actually built it and keep it going, but for those up top who are hoarding the wealth. So let's get into it. You hear it all the time. If you want more money, get a better job. Right? That's what we hear. Minimum wage jobs aren't supposed to support a family. We hear that all the time too. But here's the thing. That's not how this was originally set up. Right? The federal minimum wage was created as a way to help people get ahead. It wasn't created as a starter pay for teenagers flipping burgers. It was created during the Great Depression when people were working long hours for pennies and still going hungry. So in 1938, President Roosevelt, he signed in the Fair Labor Standards Act, right? And with it, the very first federal minimum wage. It was 25 cents an hour. And so, that might sound laughable by today's standards, but at the time, man, that was a game changer. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about valuing work. Roosevelt said, and this is important, that a living wage means more than just survival. It means the wages of a decent living. Think about that. Wages of a decent living. That was the point, to make sure that no one who worked full-time in this country had to live in poverty. That seems pretty fair. And for a while, we kept that promise. The minimum wage got regular increases. It rose with inflation. It reflected the basic idea that if you worked hard, you should be able to live with stability and dignity. In 1968, the minimum wage hit a peak value. It was about $1.60 an hour. And when you adjust that for inflation, it would be the equivalent of about $14 today. But the major difference here is back then, that wage was enough to afford a modest apartment, a car, even set a little aside for savings. But today, earning around $14 an hour barely covers rent in most cities, let alone anything else you need to live, basic necessities. That's why the number sounds very similar. The reality is it isn't, because the cost of living has far, far outpaced inflation, and the purchasing power of the paycheck simply just isn't what it used to be. So somewhere along the way, the idea that minimum wage could support individuals and families was just lost. We just got away from it because today the federal minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour, the same as it's been since 2009. It's over 15 years without a raise. As of 2025, 13 states still have their minimum wage set at the federal level. The same as it's been since 2009. That's crazy. And 3 more states, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, technically have a lower state minimum wage than the federal. Although most people get paid at least $7.25 in those states. But that means effectively that 21 states are operating at the federal minimum wage. This is despite years of inflation, rising costs, rising living costs are out of control. Right? It's a stark reminder of how far we are behind on wages in this country. It's no wonder we have the divide we have today. Think about that. Gas prices have gone up, rent has gone up, healthcare, groceries, everything costs more. But wages, it pretty much remained frozen. So the part that stings is if minimum wage had kept up with worker productivity, meaning if workers were actually paid in line with what they contributed to the economy, it wouldn't be $7.25 an hour. Nope. It wouldn't even be $15 an hour. It would be easily over $23 an hour. So when people just say, just work harder, man, the truth is people already are working harder, okay? So let me give you an example. But before we do that, let's bring in Kate for Kate's Civic Corner.
Thanks, Ben. Hey folks, Kate here with the Civic Corner, taking a minute to highlight some opportunities to get involved here in Southwest Washington. If you don't live around here, get on the web and do a little searching. I'm sure you'll find some options near you. As always, we'll put a link in the show notes for each of the events that we're highlighting here, where you can find more information, including what to expect and how to sign up. Okay, coming up on May 22nd at 7 p.m. is the 17th Legislative District Democrats General Meeting, being held via Zoom. And on May 26th at 7 p.m. is the Washougal City Council meeting. On May 27th, Cowlitz County Republicans have their Central Committee meeting at 6:30 p.m. in Kelso. And the volunteer organization we're highlighting this week is the Lower Columbia River Estuary Partnership. This is a group of scientists, educators, and community members like us who are passionate about preserving the area around the Columbia River, namely the lower 146 miles from the Bonneville Dam to the Pacific Ocean. Now that we're into the spring-summer season, volunteers focus on mulching, invasive species removal, and other general maintenance tasks. Check out the link for details on how to join this effort. These are just a few of the ways to get involved. If these particular ones are not convenient for you, do a little searching. There are sure to be events closer to you and/or on dates that work better for you. If there's an event in Southwest Washington that you'd like us to feature here on Evergreen Perspective, please put it in the comments or send us an email. This is Kate with Kate's Civic Corner, encouraging you to get out there and get involved. Now back to Ben.
Thanks, Kate. So back to our example. Let's take Chris. He works 2 jobs. One as a barista, one driving for a rideshare app. He puts in easily 50 to 60 hours a week. He doesn't get any vacation, doesn't have any safety net. After rent, groceries, gas, his student loan, he's left with about $100 in his account at the end of the month. Right? That's all. That's if his car doesn't break down, right? Which he counts on to make his living, right? That's if he doesn't get sick because he doesn't have health care. He can't afford it. That's if everything goes right. He has $100 left at the end of the month. And Chris isn't lazy. He's not making bad choices. He's not out buying avocado toast and wondering why he can't afford a house. That's not what he's doing. He's doing everything this country told him to do. Work hard. Show up. Stay busy. Right? And still, he's stuck. And Chris isn't alone. There are millions and millions of people in this country with stories just like his. Stories of working full-time, even overtime, even 2 jobs, and still living paycheck to paycheck. Still choosing between groceries and medicines or groceries and rent. Still hoping nothing goes wrong because there's nothing left for them to fall back on. Right? Chris isn't alone. A majority of Americans today are living paycheck to paycheck. According to recent data from 2024, about 59% of U.S. consumers, that's nearly 6 in 10 people, don't have any financial cushion. If a surprise bill shows up, if car breaks down, if hours get cut at work, it's a crisis for them. That's how close people are to the edge. Because this isn't just about rent or wages or the price of eggs. It's about dignity. It's about the sense that no matter how hard you work, you're still falling behind. The system is broken, man. It's been rigged. And that frustration that we feel, that we hear at the coffee shop and at the school board meetings and the comment sections of social media, it's the root of so much of the anger and division we're seeing today. People's wages simply aren't enough. Because when people feel like they've been working harder and harder for less, meanwhile, billionaires getting tax breaks, flying private, and buying elections, it builds a lot of resentment amongst the people. And that resentment isn't just political, it gets personal. And people are angry, and rightfully so. We should be angry, right? It's boiling over at every turn. We should be angry at the ultra-wealthy and the billionaires who aren't paying fair wages. They're laughing all the way to the bank, right? They benefit from this chaos, from this infighting that we do. Because while we're busy arguing over a pile of crumbs, they're stacking fortunes. While we debate whether struggling Americans deserve help, they're hoarding more wealth than any generation in history. This isn't left or right issue. This is an up and down issue. And if we can't agree that hardworking people deserve fair wages and a fair shot, then the divide will keep growing until there's nothing left to divide. Because America has never had a wider wealth gap than it does right now. Not during the Great Depression. Not during the Gilded Age. Not ever. And what I still can't wrap my head around is why do so many hardworking Americans, middle class, lower middle class, even the working poor, keep jumping to defend these billionaires and CEOs? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. We should be standing together demanding real wages and fair economy from the ultra-wealthy and the billionaires. Not protecting the people who've spent decades hoarding more wealth. They're hoarding more wealth than they could spend in 100 lifetimes. Meanwhile, we're living paycheck to paycheck. And I see it every single day. Working people defending these billionaires and CEOs, echoing their talking points, backing up their greed as if those billionaires are going to turn around and help them out. Let me be clear about something. They won't. They don't care about you. They care about the labor you provide and how cheaply they can get it from you. And it's time we stop taking that. The truth is, they need us. They need us to keep the machines running, stock the shelves, deliver the goods, build the apps, clean the offices. They have money. They have plenty of money to pay us real wages. They're just choosing not to, and we have to start demanding it. We have to stop fighting each other. They've built their fortunes by exploiting labor, plain and simple. Let me give you an example, I think, one that we're all recognize. Let's take a fast food restaurant, right? Fast food worker. They're flipping burgers, mopping floors, dealing with customers, working double shifts, all while making, 12 or 13 bucks an hour if they're lucky, right? And then we know, meanwhile, the price of that burger keeps going up. It used to be, $4. Now it's $8. And everyone's mad about it. But here's what doesn't make sense. Instead of being mad at the corporation raising these prices and hoarding these profits, reporting record profits, people get mad at that worker. They blame that person who's asking for fair wages as if the reason their lunch costs more is them, as if that worker is the problem. But that's just not the case. The stock price for that fast food chain is rising quarter after quarter. The company's pulling billions in profits. CEOs getting bonuses, shareholders getting dividends, and those workers, they still can't afford rent. They don't get adequate health care. They don't get paid time off. They don't get enough to live on. So now they qualify for SNAP benefits, Medicaid, and housing assistance. And who pays for that now? We do, the working class. The taxpayers pay for that. So while this billion-dollar burger chain is cashing in, we're subsidizing their workforce. We're covering the gap between what their employees earn and what it actually costs to survive. This is exactly what exploiting labor looks like. They're not creating working wage jobs because they're billionaires. It's about billion-dollar companies offloading the cost of basic human needs onto the rest of us while pretending there's no money left for the raises. And it's not just happening in fast food industry, obviously. It's retail and healthcare and logistics everywhere. The people doing the most essential are treated as the most expendable. And that's not just unethical. That's corporate welfare disguised as capitalism. It's called corporatism, right? And it needs to stop. We have to demand fair wages. And if we don't push back now, if we don't fight for each other instead of fighting each other, we're going to look back and wonder how we let it all slip away. How did we get here? Right? We have the numbers, we have the masses, but we need unity, right? We need it now. Unless we start addressing that honestly with real policy, we're going to keep living in a country where the rich get richer and the rest of us are told, just work harder, get a better job. Let's be clear, this isn't just low-income households or middle class that are living paycheck to paycheck. Not at all. Even about 1 in 5 people earning over $150,000 a year say they're living paycheck to paycheck too. And some might say they're just not budgeting right or whatever, but I'd say it says more about that. I don't think it's a matter of budgeting or financial literacy. It's cost of living that's completely out of sync with wages. So with that, let's take a look at the past. In the 1950s and 60s, the American economy at the time was experiencing significant growth, big growth. The gross national product, GNP, grew 250% between 45 and 60. And the per capita income increased by 35% during that same time period. Right? And so this is economic boom. And it translated into real benefits for most American families. I say most, because not all. But by the 50s and 60s, the American population had attained 60% had attained middle class standard of living, which was notated then as between $3,000 and $10,000 a year. Right? Home ownership at the time became increasingly attainable. Homes were being built at a rate that were keeping up with the demand. So 21 million homes were constructed during this same time period. 60% of Americans own their own home. Right? At this time, consumer goods were also becoming more widespread. So by the end of the 1950s alone, 87% of families owned a television. That was a big deal back then. 75% owned a car, and 75% had a washing machine. That's pretty cool. 1950, the federal minimum wage was 75 cents an hour. And by 1960, it went to $1, and then in 1968, it reached $1.60, which is still the highest it's ever been when adjusted for inflation. Think about that. It doesn't sound like much, but let's put it into some context. A full-time worker in 1968 earning the federal minimum wage would have made about $3,300 per year. So adjusted for today's dollar, that's roughly the equivalent of $14 to $15 an hour, which is far above what today's federal minimum wage, which we know is $7.25 an hour. But here's what really matters. This is the point that really matters. Back then, the minimum wage was enough to live on. A single wage earner could often afford rent, utilities, groceries, and a car payment, and still set a little aside. All that without a partner's income or a second job. Right? Was it middle class? Just barely. It was lower middle class. Definitely not wealthy, as we know, but it was stable and respected. And gave them a decent life with room to grow. Today, however, a full-time worker earning minimum wage pulls in about $15,000 a year before taxes. That's not enough to afford a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in the United States of America. And I want to talk about that year, 1968. It wasn't just a number. It was the high water mark of a certain kind of American promise. Work hard, and you'll get ahead. If you play by the rules, everything's going to be okay. You're going to have all that you need to survive. But after that, everything started to change. Right after that 1968 point, the minimum wage stopped keeping up with the cost of living. It didn't rise with inflation. It didn't rise with worker productivity. It basically just stalled. And it hasn't caught up since. Not even close. So what happened? Well, starting in the late 60s into the 1970s, the country began shifting away from the New Deal era economics that had powered the post-war middle class. Unions began to be weakened, corporations started outsourcing jobs overseas, and politicians from both parties, but especially under Ronald Reagan, embraced a new way of thinking, supply-side economics, right? We had cut tax for the wealthy. Let's do that. That'll help, right? Deregulate. Oh, that'll help. Let the market work its magic. They called it something spectacular. Trickle down. But for most Americans, nothing ever trickled down, and it still doesn't today. And at the same time, during that period of time, productivity kept going up, up, up. Productivity got more, but the wages didn't, right? Before 1973, when workers made more stuff, guess what? They also made more money. But even after productivity skyrocketed, wages just stayed flatlined. That extra value and productivity didn't go to the people doing the work. It went up, up, up to the shareholders, to the CEOs. It went to the very top. Everything trickled up. Should have been called trickle-up economics. And then there was globalization, right? Manufacturing job, once the backbone of the middle class, got shipped overseas in the name of efficiency. If you haven't listened to the manufacturing podcast, give it a listen. It expands on that quite a bit more. And so, this efficiency, it just tore communities apart. The only thing it did was help corporate profits. It trickled more money up, right? And all the while, the economy became less about making things and more about moving money around, right? It's more and more putting profit above people, right? Financial institutions, stock buybacks, all became more powerful than the factories that built the middle class. So when we talk about 1968 at the peak, it's not just about the minimum wage. It was the last time that policy, labor, and prosperity were even remotely aligned. After that, they changed the rules, right? For the working people, the ones who actually make this country run, those new rules haven't been working for us. This divide that we're seeing right now has been in the making for more than 40 years. And if we don't join together, and by we, I mean all of us, every hardworking American, middle class, lower middle class, working poor, we have to stop punching down, right? We have to join together, right? To hold those accountable that are responsible. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat, Republican, independent, anything else. We, the people, the working people, need to get together to demand living wages for all. So people say minimum wage jobs aren't supposed to support a family. I'd say they used to. They were designed to. And they still should. We just stopped letting them. We gave in to the propaganda that tripled down economics would take care of everything. We've given trickle-down economics 40 years, and it's clear it does not help the working class. The numbers don't lie. Billionaires and politicians do. So yeah, we've been heading the wrong direction. And for a growing number of people, no matter how much they earn or how hard they work, they're still treading water because wages are just not living wages. This isn't about somebody's individual failure. It's about a system that stopped rewarding hard work. The minimum wage was never meant to trap people in poverty. It was meant to be a baseline for a decent life, a decent living, basic needs. But now, it's not a foundation, it's a ceiling. And far too many people are being asked to build their lives underneath it, with nowhere to go. So let's fast forward from wages to what a paycheck is supposed to buy you. A roof over your head, shelter. Because for most people, housing isn't some option, it's the baseline. But right now, it's one of the biggest sources of financial stress in this country. We already know rents are out of control. They are. Not just in the big cities, also in suburbs and rural areas. Prices are climbing, right? Availability is shrinking. And for working people, the dream of stable housing is slipping away. It's easy to see. Let's take a look at the numbers. In the 1960s, the average American spent about 17 to 20% of their income on housing. Not bad. Today, it's not uncommon to see families, especially renters, spending 30, 40, or even 50% of their monthly income just to keep a roof over their head, just to keep a simple place to live. We've got people working full-time jobs, even 2 jobs, who can't afford a decent apartment. Now, some of this comes down to basic supply and demand. We haven't been building enough affordable housing, and that was true long before COVID hit. But the pandemic really brought that to light and has made it impossible to ignore at this point. Because when COVID began, everything kind of shifted. So, people started being able to work from home suddenly, which meant they had a demand for more space, or they could live outside of their immediate work area, right? Interest rates were slashed near zero, right, which made borrowing really cheap. And then once supply chains froze and construction slowed and inventory was already tight, what happened? And then we add to that a surge of investors and hedge funds buying up homes, and not to live in, but to flip, rent, or some of them just sit on. And suddenly prices exploded. I mean, when I'm talking exploded, I mean exploded. From 2020 to 2022, the median house price jumped by more than 40%. 40%. They tried to bring it back down. The Federal Reserve started raising interest rates. Too little, too late. Didn't work. Because at the end of the day, we still hadn't built enough houses. Right? And because institutional investors are still sitting on massive housing portfolios. Local zoning laws still make it hard to build multifamily units or starter homes. And because many homeowners now locked into low mortgage rates, they're not selling, which means now we have even less supply coming onto the market. So what we're left with is a market where prices remain sky high. Mortgage rates are, pretty high still. And the average middle-class American, can't afford to buy a home anymore. Just like that. Here we are. And we know, if we're honest, homeownership used to be the cornerstone of middle-class life. It wasn't about luxury. It's not about luxury. It was about stability and equity and a future, being able to pass that down to, your kids so that they could build some equity. So the answer isn't just waiting for prices to magically drop, because they're probably not going to. Not without some serious increase in supply, and that's going to take some time. What we need right now, we can demand it, is for wages to catch up with where we are in the year 2025. Because housing costs aren't going back to pre-pandemic levels. And people's paychecks are still stuck in the past, while everything else rose and moved forward. Until we fix that, we're going to keep watching a generation of Americans get priced out of everything, right? Very thing that they were told if they could work hard, they could earn, right? A place called home, right? Zoning laws are often at the heart of the matter of blocking new development, right? NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard, right? That type of attitude has made it so hard to build multifamily units. We desperately need them. Right? But there's more to it than that. We got corporate landlords and private equity firms have moved into the housing market. Not in a small way, in a big way. Right? They're not just buying homes, they're buying entire neighborhoods. And then they're just raising the rents up. Just raising them up. They're charging outrageous fees. Right? They're treating housing not as a shelter and a basic necessity, but as an investment vehicle. This means fewer starter homes for young families, right? Fewer affordable apartments for working class tenants. And a lot more people getting priced out of the places they grew up in. And who pays the price? Not just the contractors or the builders are paying higher prices, but it's inevitably the family trying to buy their first home, right? It's the young couple looking for an apartment. It's the single mom trying to keep her kids in the same school district that they've been in, trying to afford to stay in that area. Because in America today, having a full-time job doesn't guarantee you a place to live. In a lot of places, it doesn't even get you close, right? We've allowed housing, one of the most basic human needs, to become a battleground for speculation and profit. And the people caught in the middle, they're not the investors. They're everyday, hardworking Americans that are just trying to make rent before the end of the month rolls around, right? So, we've talked about wages, we've talked about housing. Now let's talk about what those wages are also supposed to help with. All the other stuff, the day-to-day reality, groceries, gas, childcare, healthcare. The stuff that you need, the stuff that it quietly drains your wallet every single week. Whether your paycheck goes up or not, those items seem to continue to rise. This is where inflation becomes real, because we hear the numbers on the news, right? 3%, 6%, whatever the Fed says, but those averages don't mean much. When the price of eggs, they've doubled, or when your electric bill jumps 30% in 1 year. Truth is, inflation doesn't hit everyone equally, right? It's not the same flat number that affects all of us the same way. It hits hardest where people spend the biggest chunk of their income, right? And if you don't make a lot, it's a bigger chunk. Food, rent, gas, utilities, right? Basic needs to survive. So if you're living paycheck to paycheck, or even close to it, right? We're going to feel every single spike, every single rise. We're going to notice when the price of a gallon of milk goes up. You're going to notice when bread goes up, when eggs go up. You're going to notice when the gas price goes up. You got to hold your breath when that electric bill shows up, wondering if it's going to be too much and how you're going to figure out how to pay for it. For the wealthy, inflation might mean one less, vacation home. For the upper middle class, it might mean, putting off a house remodel or something, But for the working class, the working poor, it means choosing between groceries and medicines. It means, paying rent or, paying something else. It means watching every single cent and still coming up short at the end of the month and wondering how you're going to make it. Right? These are the same folks doing the work that keep everything running. The cashiers, the drivers, warehouse crews, child care providers. They're the engine of the economy, but they're the ones getting squeezed the hardest. And we're just allowing it to happen. And what makes it worse is that we're just told to tighten the belts, get $1 instead of $3, while billion-dollar companies rake in record profits and pass the cost on all of us. Inflation is hard, but it's crushing when you're already on the edge. In this country right now, that's millions and millions of people are on the edge. Not because they're lazy or irresponsible, but because the system they're working in is broken by design. And when we talk about housing, we're not just talking about new buyers or the cost of mortgage. Right? We've already mentioned it. We're talking about rent. And it's been exploding. In many U.S. cities, rents jumped 15 to 30% in just a 2-year span between 2021 and 2023. And like I said, that's not just big cities anymore. That's smaller towns, suburbs, all seeing the same trends. Right? Here in Washington State, some renters have seen $400, $600, even $800 rent increases in a single year. No renovations, no added amenities, right? Just a note taped to the door with a new number circled on it. Here's your new rent. And what are their options at that point? There's nowhere to go, right? There's not enough affordable units out there. Vacancy rates are low, right? And more landlords are no longer individuals anyway. They're corporations. Right? They're private equity firms. They're real estate investment trust. Right? They own thousands of properties. They use software to coordinate rent hikes across the market. They're not negotiating. Think they care? They don't care. They don't care if your job came with a raise this year. They care about maximizing yield on their asset. And their asset is your home. And while you're being asked to pay more for the same space, guess what's happening to corporate profit margins? Right? In 2021 and 2022, during peak inflation, U.S. corporations posted their highest profit margins in over 70 years. Profit margins. We're not talking about revenue. We're talking about profits, the money left after covering all the costs. And it's not just some weird coincidence. Not at all. It's inflation being used as an excuse to exploit the American people. Right? Economists even have a name for it now. You've probably heard it. Greedflation. Right? And nowhere was this more evident than in the grocery industry. Right? Even as supply chains stabilized and the commodities cost eased, right, we expected food prices to follow suit, to come down. But that relief hasn't came. Instead, prices have remained high, and in some cases, they continue to climb. Let's take Publix, for example. In the first quarter of 2023, they reported profits of $1.4 billion, marking a 10% increase. Similarly, Kroger faced scrutiny when top executives admitted during an antitrust trial that the company had increased the price of select items well beyond inflation levels. Right? This wasn't about prices going up. The strategy wasn't isolated. A federal report by the Federal Trade Commission in March found that large grocery retailers accelerated and distorted the effects of supply chain disruptions to increase their profits. The analysis indicated that some large retailers use rising costs as an opportunity to further hike their prices, right? Elevating their profit margins even more, even though there was no supply chain issues at that point. And the results are easy to see, right? Consumers paying more at the checkout. Not because of ongoing supply issues, but because corporations saw an opportunity to boost their bottom line. So here we are, wages stagnant, costs climbing, billion-dollar companies using inflation as cover to squeeze even more out of hardworking Americans. This isn't about poor choices. It's not about working harder. It's about a system that's been redesigned to reward the top and leave the rest of us scrambling along. So here we are. We've talked about wages, labor, talked about the promise of hard work leading to stability, how it's been broken, and we know who's profiting from the system. So tune in next week, part 2. We're going to dig into how this plays out in everyday life, at the grocery store, the gas pump, and especially going to dig deep into the housing market next week. Because it's not just that we're underpaid, it's that the essentials of survival have become completely unaffordable. So join me next week. We're going to talk about greedflation, rent hikes, and what it really costs to live in today's America. I'm Ben Chrisley, and this is Evergreen Perspective. Thanks for joining me. Take care of yourself, and take care of each other. See you next time.